Good afternoon. My name is Chris Anthony, and I'd like to spend a little while talking to you about my experiences in the Vietnam War. Where did it begin? More importantly, where did I begin? Well, I got my start in Tulsa, Oklahoma in 1947. I was born in that time frame, didn't stay there very long. My parents then moved up to Kansas City, Missouri, where I pretty much spent most of my childhood growing up in the 50s out in the countryside in Missouri. And I think probably like most boys, when you're 8, 9, 10 years old, we were making up an awful lot of our own games and everything. All boys at that time wanted to play Army. We wanted to play war. I don't think that there were very many war movies on the old little black and white TV set that we weren't watching. I won't say I was enthralled by it, but I was just fascinated by it. It was all I ever wanted to do, was go into the military. And as I grew up, my folks had moved twice to California and back because my dad was a shop foreman with a Ford Motor Company. And I didn't really have, it was a pretty much uneventful life growing up. America at that time, we had Truman had been the president, then we had Eisenhower, and America was still a very conservative, a very moral nation by the way we defined morality at that time. And there wasn't an awful lot of concern. We lived the kind of life where you left your doors unlocked at night, where your kids would be out playing after dark and you didn't have to worry about them. So my life was pretty much spent like that with myself and my brothers. I had 2 brothers and a sister. And as I got on into junior high school, Alan Shepard had just made his 15-minute flight into space in 1960. And there was a great deal of pride in America when that was going on. We felt that there wasn't anything we couldn't do. In fact, our president at that time, President Kennedy, had set a goal of getting to the moon, of setting goals that were not easy, but as he said, they were hard to test our mantle as a country, as a people. Well, along about 1963, I think the whole country started to change. There were several factors there. For one thing, in November of '63, we had our president assassinated. First one in living memory. People didn't know how to react to that. Some people thought we were actually going to go to war with Russia. But we were panicking. We had the famous Cuban Missile Crisis at that time. And then in 1964, February, we had a group of 4 young men come from England called the Beatles. We had never seen anything like that in our lives. But I truly believe that was the very beginning of America going down a road it had never been before, had no idea what was down there. We were very naive, very gullible, because I think that the Beatles had changed so much. They changed the clothing styles, they changed the music. Liberal thinking really got its start at about that time. And most importantly, there was a conflict going on halfway around the world that very few people knew anything about. They couldn't even hardly tell you where the place was at. First time I ever saw it was a small clipping on the second page of a paper mentioning something about the Viet Minh and Vietnam and that sort of area. The column probably wasn't 2 inches long. And that was my first hearing of it. But by the time high school came out and I graduated in '65, that summer, I had been going down to the recruiting office a number of times with a real good friend of mine. And we'd always go down there and the recruiters would give us these book covers that we'd cover our school books with because the covers were advertising Army, Navy, Air Force, whatever happened to be, their plug at the time. And Ralph and I, my friend, we were excited about that. And then in November of '65, I had been working part-time as a busboy. Well, I couldn't see doing that the rest of my life, and I had gone down and talked to the Army recruiter a little bit more, and he convinced me that the Army was where I should be. So I enlisted. I volunteered in November of '65. Vietnam was starting to pick up a little bit of motion and activity that time, but still it was a back burner thing. I took my basic at Fort Leonard Wood in Missouri, and then I took my advanced individual training at Fort Jackson, South Carolina. At that point, that would have been January of '66. I came down on orders to go to Germany, and I was in Germany for 2 years. Still, the Army was something exciting for me. There were certain things I had not anticipated, the KP duties and the other working in the motor pool and that sort of thing. I had graduated from AIT with an MOS in infantry, 11 Bravo 40. That was my specialty, was infantry, light weapons infantry. And I'm thinking it was the fall of '67. The fall of '67, I was promoted to Sergeant E5, and I got to go home on leave. And I was gone from home about a month. I came back to Germany about mid-December. And at the end of that month, I came down on orders for Vietnam. Well, most of us by that point were very familiar with Vietnam. It was on the newscasts at home at 6 o'clock evening news with Walter Cronkite. We were getting our news from Stars and Stripes about the war. And that was about the only way I was hearing about it, except when I was home on leave and watching the news. But I knew that I was going to be home for another month of leave, and I had to report to Oakland Army Terminal in the first week of March of '68. And I have to confess, it didn't bother me. It really was not bothering me at that point, because by then I'd been seeing enough news reports about the war in Vietnam. I was curious. I really was curious to go over and see what was going on. I knew guys were going to Canada, but it never even entered my mind once to go to Canada. Why? I go to Canada, I'm in the Army, I'm in trouble. And besides that, I really wanted to go. I really wanted to go to satisfy that curiosity. The end of my leave time, my dad is driving me over to Fort Leavenworth, where we're going to meet up with some other guys, and then we're all going to take a bus. We were going to Fort Leavenworth, and I had mentioned earlier, the only news we ever got about the war when I was in Germany was Stars and Stripes, which is a military newspaper. It was being published in the Second World War, so it's been out for a long time. And when I told my mother the first time I was volunteering for the Army, I called her on the phone and I said, "Mom, I just enlisted." Well, she said, "Well, how long are you going to be gone?" Also, I enlisted for 4 years. She broke down and started crying. She was sobbing. I mean, typical mother, "Oh, my boy, I'm going to..." But, she finally accepted it. The military was not new in our family. My dad had been an infantryman in the Pacific in the Second World War. And so she came to grips with it. She settled with it. When they realized I was going to Vietnam, it was just a little bit different then. Like any mother, she starts worrying. I mean, mothers are worried about their sons going to war since the beginning of time. So I don't think any fears and anxieties that she was having was any different than most mothers have. I don't really remember her talking about it very much. I don't think she really wanted to be honest with you. And on the day that my dad was driving me, Mom was out on the steps of the front porch. We lived out in the country. And Dad's driving, we're driving down this dirt road. And I'm looking in the side mirror, and I can see my mom was back there. So my mom stayed on that porch until we were completely out of sight. And I didn't think about this till much later, but I'm sure Mom was trying to remember me as long as she could. She was trying to cement my image in her mind. And I appreciated that more after I got home, especially after I had my own kids. But I started crying. And I told my dad, I'm sitting here crying like a baby. And my dad said, I'll never forget it, he said, well, don't you think anything of it. I did too when I went over. And I said, here was a man who had been on Guadalcanal. He had been on Bloody Peleliu. And that did something for me. It picked me up, it lifted me up, it made me realize, that it was perfectly normal. And Dad didn't talk to me much about me going to Vietnam. That would come along much later. But I finally got to Oakland. And when I got to Oakland, they had enormous hangars that had bunks stacked up all over the place. It was a staging area, essentially. It was a staging area for the troops going to Vietnam and for the troops coming back from Vietnam, because this was a going concern day after day after day. In March of '68, we were really reaching the peak. We were just about at 500,000 servicemen over there. We still did not think we were going to be in Vietnam. I talked it over with some other guys. I said, I kind of think, my gut feeling is halfway over there, they're going to change our orders. And they're going to wind up flying us somewhere else. Vietnam was that unreal. And I think people who did not live at that time and were not aware of the constancy of Vietnam being presented to you on the evening news would never appreciate that. But it just seemed another world entirely. And we really did not think we would get there. Now, we were flying an old 707, Boeing 707, and I think there might have been about 300 of us on that plane, every one of them GIs. And we were giving the stewardesses a pretty hard time, as GIs will. There are only 6 females on the plane. And we had that party atmosphere until the pilot got on the intercom and he said, gentlemen, if you'll look out the left side of the aircraft down below, you can see the coastline of the Republic of South Vietnam. I don't exaggerate. I think you could have almost heard a pin drop inside that plane, because it dawned on us. It really hit us as reality had never done before. There is a Vietnam. We are going to be down there. There is a war going on. And when I looked, every little column of smoke I saw, I knew it was a major battle going on. Well, it wasn't. But that for newbies, you could have sold us anything. And the veterans, when we got on the ground, did just that. They gave us all kinds of horror stories. When we landed at Tan Son Nhut, the stewardesses were up front, and all of the guys are getting up, and we're going forward, and we still got that cocky attitude. And all 6 of the stewardesses are there at the door, greeting us as we go out. And this one guy says, hey, look, y'all come back in 13 months. That was a normal tour time over in Vietnam. Come back in 13 months, I'm going to take you all out on a date. And they're smiling, they're grinning, kind of giving them a thumbs up. And it dawned on me later, because I saw tears in their eyes. This isn't their first time over here. This isn't the first flight they've made that they've brought guys over there. They had to have known that probably half those guys were never going to date again. But we didn't know that. I mean, that was the reality of it. When I stepped off the plane, the first 2 things that really hit me, one was the blood red sunset. It was sundown. There were military vehicles, jeeps, trucks all over that place, stirring up the dust and the dirt and everything, and it gave that red hue to the sunset. The second thing, I smelled an open garbage dump somewhere. It was very, very strong. And I said to myself, 24 hours ago, I was in the golden sunshine of California. Now I'm on the red stinking end of the world somewhere. And that kind of transition takes time to get used to. I was not ready for it. Most of us weren't. We could hear artillery going off, and I thought they were incoming rounds, and all the newbies were ducking, and all the veterans were laughing, you know. And they put us on this bus that was going to go over to the 90th Replacement Group at Long Bend, where we would get our orders. And I had noticed the bus. They were old school buses, and they had wire mesh on all the windows. Well, I kind of figured what they were for, but I wanted confirmation, and I had asked some of the guys, and they said, well, that's because Charlie likes to run up to the side of the bus and lob grenades in the bus, and that kind of slows him down. And that started to hit me too. Every little thing that you saw, every little thing that you were hearing seemed to emphasize the fact that you're in a war zone, and you could get killed over here. And that was one of the first things that I started to learn. Don't play the hero. Pay attention. Pay attention. Maybe these stories these veterans are giving you are a bunch, cock and bull. But you pretend they're real. You pretend he's talking about something that's actually happened. I was assigned to the 2nd Battalion, 2nd Mechanized Infantry in the 1st Infantry Division, and I was going to be going to their base camp. But on the way out, I noticed there were these 2 or 3 guys in these tiger stripe fatigues wearing these black berets. And they were Americans, American military. And I struck up a conversation. I said, who are you guys? And they said they were LRRPs. I said, well, what is that? He said, well, that's just short for Long Range Reconnaissance Patrol. Well, here I am, the John Wayne guy, all the movies that I saw with Randall Scott and John Wayne, I'm still in that mindset. So I said, oh, man, that sounds like something I'd really like to do. Well, they weren't crazy. If a guy was going to volunteer for it and they needed volunteers, they weren't going to talk me out of it. But I said, I've already got my orders cut for 2nd of the 2nd. And one of them was a Sergeant E7. He said, don't worry about that. We'll get your orders changed. And they did. That very day, they got those orders changed to go up to F Company, 52nd LRRPs up in Hey, it was a 1st Infantry Division LRRP company. And I waited for the longest time to get a Jeep that would take me up there. So about the time I got up there was after dark. And I was taken into the company compound, and I went into the tent. They had these big Army tents, sides rolled up, some weren't, with the cots inside on the ply or they're wooden ties type of floors. I can't think of the word for it. Wooden pallets. And he introduced me to 4 of the guys who were in there. One was a team leader, one was a LRRP team leader. And I mean to tell you, they made quite the impression, because here are 4 guys stripped down, to their waist. They're got, in their jungle fatigues, brown as nuts. These guys have been in town a long time. And as I looked around the tent, I could see different weapons of different calibers laying here and there, loose grenades lying on the cots, loose ammo laying on the floor, bayonets stuck, and other kinds of combat knives. And the first thing goes through my head is, what in the Sam Hill have I got myself into here? Because I thought Charlie could walk into that base camp. I didn't know what a perimeter was. I had not seen a perimeter, and so I'm thinking he can come in at any time. And they had yet to tell me, that it was a secure perimeter. And they said they couldn't do anything till the next day, so they said, look, we'll issue you your M16, we'll give you a cot, and tomorrow we'll start working on this. Okay, I got my M16. They told me where the ammo was if I wanted to get some rounds. I bet you I brought back enough ammo to finish that war and start another one. I did. I found out that I said, okay, any of the tents available? I said, yeah, any Tents available, get a cot, you're fine. I went and I found a cot in one of the tents, and I drug it out by this bunker because I wanted to be straight in that bunker if there was any problems during the night. And that was my introduction. That was my first full day in Vietnam. And I didn't know from anything. But the next day, I was assigned to a team, and we didn't go out for like 2 days. But when we did go out, it was, I remember it was a 5 or a 6 man team. Now, because I already held the rank of sergeant, they were going to make me an assistant team leader. I had no experience at all. But their philosophy always was, look, you're either going to learn real quick or go home in a body bag. You know, we just don't have time to take you out there and train you per se. And so I said, all right, fine, I'll do that. And the first mission we went out on, they chopper you out. We had gotten on the Huey helicopter down at the airstrip. They will take you out to the area that you're to recon. LRRPs was strictly recon. If the Army was going to do an operation in a particular area, a full-scale operation, they wanted an alert team to go in there, scout it out. Where's the enemy? What's he doing? What's the terrain look like? Can you get us any intelligence? And then once that's done, then they plan their operations. And usually we were out there 2 or 3 days. When we went in, the Huey would go from place to place, going down below tree level, but never actually touching down, and then he'd lift, he'd go somewhere else. Do that 3 or 4 times. The point was Charlie would never know where you got out in that, because if you were ever compromised, they had to get you out right now. 5 men will not survive out there, you know, in enemy territory like that. And so once we were inserted, you usually wait about 15, 20 minutes in the wood line until that chopper, that sound of that chopper is long gone, because you're wanting to see, did anybody come out here to check this out? Did anybody come out here to see what the noise was? And if it's quiet, then we go ahead and move out. We had our maps, we knew where we wanted to go. I had pulled maybe 8, maybe 10 missions with the LRRPs. But I remember one mission, more than any of them. We were with an infantry company, and we were pulling reconnaissance for these guys. And on this particular afternoon, we went out. We were going to set up an ambush down the road, probably half mile from where their NDP was. That NDP just means night defensive position. It can either be a few days, few nights, or it can wind up being a permanent location. But it's still just known as an NDP. We were down the road about a half a mile, and we had set up the ambush. And I remember, I'm sitting there, I have got to go to the bathroom so bad. You know, and I'm telling the team leader, look, I'm going out here in the brush. I'm going to get as far away as I can to be, you know, courteous to you guys. And so I go out there, and I've got the C ration, toilet paper in one hand, I've got the 45 in the other. And I'm out there, I'm doing my thing, went far enough away, but not out of sight of these guys. And then when I came back, we'd been there a few minutes when the team leader said, we got movement out front of our position. And we had already set Claymore mines out around us. And I didn't see anything, didn't hear anything. I couldn't get any of the other guys to verify there was anything out there. But the team leader said they were there, that's good enough. Team leader gave the signal to blow the Claymores. And we blew all the Claymores out in front of us. He said, get up and go. Now we knew when we blew the Claymores, anybody in that area were dead. In fact, when we charged through there, I remember there were 2 bodies on the ground. So obviously, Charlie had been there. We made our way down to a road that was probably the road we had come up, probably 50 yards, 70 yards maximum. Got on the other side of the road and jumped in the ditch and turned and faced our rear in case anybody was following us. We stayed there for maybe half an hour. Nothing happened. And so we got back on the road. We'd already called ahead, said, look, we've been compromised out here. We're bringing a team in to the NDP. We got there that night, and sometime the next morning, the captain, there was a company commander there, had talked to the team leader and accused us of blowing that ambush just to have an excuse to come back in. He didn't call us cowards, but he might as well have. And that really bothered us. And we were going to go out at 9 o'clock that morning, and we were going to do a recon that day. And we went out. About 15, 20 minutes later, we had set up on this trail to take a 10-minute break. Everything was fine. Everything was cool. And then we got up, and then gunfire opens up, and everybody's flat on the ground. Our point man, for the life of me, I can't remember his name. I see him as vivid as anything. But he's yelling, I got him, it's okay, I got him. We went up, and this guy had killed a Viet Cong about probably as close as this lamp post is to me right now. But the brush and the shrub was so thick he didn't see him. In fact, the only reason he did see him is that when he went to move his M16, it was snagged, and he was looking down it, and he's looking right in the face of that Charlie, and he just opened up on him. We wounded the guy, and it was that time that this kid pulls out. He had a police Smith & Wesson .38 revolver that the Vietnamese police used all the time, that I had traded to him to get a .45 automatic, which was stupid. You can get a .45 anywhere over there. You couldn't get a police .38. So he pulls out this .38, and he points it down at Charlie and says, this is for so-and-so, and shoots him in the head. Because he had just been really seriously wounded, but he wasn't dead at that point. It didn't bother me. And I don't think I had been in country a week yet, but it didn't bother me. I'm saying, well, what are you going to do? Nurse him back to health? We can't be tied down with stuff like this. So the team leader says, wait a minute, I got another use for this guy. And he slings this bloody body up over his shoulder, and as we're going through this clearing, we see an anthill. And we just took advantage of that. We propped the guy up against this big termite mound, and we gathered around him, and one of the guys pulls out a camera. Highly illegal. You were not supposed to have cameras out there because, unfortunately, some of that film got back to the States, and the peaceniks and the anti-war people were just looking for ammunition like that. So they told us, no, you can't have cameras. But this guy did that day, and he took a picture. One of the guys suggested, hey, let's send these home as Mother's Day cards. I said, nah, I don't think your mom's going to appreciate that a whole lot. So we picked the body up. We're going back up in the NDP. We get into the NDP, and I noticed the team leader, he was a tall guy, he's heading off to the captain's tent. And I'm looking at these other guys, and we pretty much got the idea what he was up to at that point. We followed him. He goes over and he plops that dead body in front of the captain's tent. Captain comes out, and he's fuming. Sergeant, you want to explain this? Team leader said, yeah, enemy contact. And we just turned around and walked away. And we got choppered back to our base camp that afternoon, and I'm sure probably the captain had a lot to do with that. But I'll never forget that as long as I live, and the look on his face. That's enemy contact, all right. One of the things we had to do in Song Bay, and really every place that you went after dark, you had what they call LPs, which were listening posts. You would go out after dark, outside the wire, and your job was to listen to see if, any enemy approaching or whatever, and then get the word back inside. Well, sometimes they'd want you to go clear the heck out there 200 or 300 yards. I never knew anybody that ever went that far. I said, we're not going to go any farther than, we can still see our perimeter. And so this particular night we had LP. There was myself, Madrid, who was a vet. He'd been there a long time. We had a new guy. I cannot remember his name. But you go out there, you got a radio. Every hour on the hour, they will, over the radio, ask you for a sit rep, which is a situation report. And they will come on very quietly. And they might say, Blue Baker, sit rep. And then you would key your mic twice. That meant everything's cool. They're not going to talk loud because the sound's going to travel in that jungle after dark. And so as long as you click twice, you're okay for that hour. They'll come back the next hour again. Blue mic, sit rep, click, click. For some reason, they were not getting through to us. And the first couple of times we had communication with them, but I don't know what happened after that. We were not getting anything and scared the absolute crap out of us. The three of us sitting there, and all of a sudden there's thump, 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 and this smoke is pouring. Somebody had lobbed a smoke grenade out there. They knew where we were. And I think, okay, it was we either called immediately or they called back out and they said, wake the blankety blank up out there. We've been trying to call you. Okay, yeah, we're fine. But Madrid's looking at me and I'm looking at Madrid. Madrid says, two can play this game. The new man doesn't know what's going on. So Madrid reaches across and he gets this CS grenade, tear gas grenade. Pulls the pin on that thing and he lobs that back into the compound. A few minutes later, these guys run out. Oh, they're gagging, they're choking, running out of the bunkers. We're laughing our butts off out there. Now, we go back in the next day, and the first sergeant's there. And he's looking at us. He can't prove it was us. Charlie could have just walked in there and threw a grenade in there, but he knew we did it. But he couldn't prove it, so he just let it go. And the only other time that I remember, we just laughed until we couldn't see straight. We had just cleared this enemy base camp. We'd been making a sweep. It's towards the end of the afternoon, and we're going through bunker to bunker and either getting, Charlie to come out on his own, or we're throwing blocks of TNT down in there to blow up the bunkers. And so our first sergeant, old guy, been in the Army forever, and there's a conversation going on between him, our Chu Hoi, and a Viet Cong that's still down in that bunker that won't come out. And Top is really getting irritated. He's standing over, I still remember he's standing over like this. He's kind of shaking that leg. And he says, what's he saying? Are you getting any progress? And the Chu Hoi says, nah, he says he think he stay down there. He say it pretty comfortable down there. He think he stay down. Top just lost it. Oh, he did he? He walks over there, pulls a pin on this grenade, lobs it down into that bunker, kabloom. Top says, well, you ask that little slant-eyed so-and-so what he thinks of it now. So there's a conversation going on, and the Chu Hoi said, he said, okay. He said he'd come out. Now, he said, it don't feel so good now. For 15 minutes, we couldn't do a thing because we were just rolling on the ground laughing. But you're right. There were those moments that you had to have, or you would have lost your minds. The humor was there. The guys knew how to do the humor. I remember the time walking through some rubber trees, and I happened to walk in to these cobwebs, and I don't know why. I did not see the stupid things there. They're there, and they were thick, and they were hard. It was kind of like breaking threads. And as I'm doing that, I feel something on my leg, and I look down, There was a spider the size of my hand. He's actually crawling up my jungle pants leg. I mean, he was big enough he had weight. I could feel it. And I remember I knocked that thing down, opened up with my M16. I mean, I shot that thing because I wasn't thinking. I panicked. I hate spiders. I hate them. Everybody's flat on the ground. The sergeant said, "Sergeant Anthony, what in the Sam Hill are you shooting at?" And I said, "Sarge, I just killed me a great big giant tarantula monster over here." He comes over with two other guys, and Top says, "Well, couldn't you have stomped on it?" One of these other guys said, "No, you can't do that, Sarge. You stomp on it, you just make him mad, you know?" And the other guy said, "Yeah, he's right, Sarge. You either got to shoot him or stab him to death." But the guys were like that. The guys were like that. It helped you to keep your sanity, even though something like that you would think, you got to have something like that to keep you sane. But you could because it was the guys you knew. You could do that. You could buddy with them and everything else. I was not in the LRRPs very, very long after that. I stayed in it long enough that they sent me and two other guys up into Nha Trang with the 5th Special Forces to our recondo school. 3 weeks of absolute living hell on earth. The first week is what they call Hell Week. That was all physical training. You would start in the morning doing your daily dozens in this sand pit with your pack, with your clothes on, or your jungle fatigues. After you did 12 of the daily dozen, got out on the road and they would run you for a mile. Now they would run you an extra mile each day so that on the 7th day, you're literally running 7 miles with the additional, they put a 30-pound sandbag in your pack. With your weapon, you're running in formation, double time. They've got a green beret on the flanks, and front and back, and behind the guy in the back's an ambulance. And that was the only way you were going to get out of that formation if you collapsed. And fortunately, we all made it, but I got to be honest with you. After about the 4th mile, I didn't feel anything. I just could not feel anything. And as we come into that last 100 yards into the compound, they told us, "All right, flat out run." And we did, and honestly, I could not feel my legs. I knew they were moving. I was reaching pure, I was running, but I couldn't feel anything. And that was my last time, really, with the LRRPs. Because I had come to the decision that, look, if I'm going to be out there, I want some company. I want their strength in numbers. 5 and 6 guys on an alert team is not my idea of strength. And so I was assigned to Charlie Company, 1st Battalion, 26th Regiment. And they were base camped out of Lai Khe, just like the LRRPs were. And my first day with the line company, like I said, being a sergeant, they gave me a squad. They made me a squad leader. And when you come into a situation like that, particularly among veterans, those veterans in that squad, they don't know you. They don't know what you're capable of. They don't know what your shortcomings are. And I knew I would have to take time and let them get to know me, and I would get to know them. And that didn't take very long. There are only 2 events that I recall that I think are really worth mentioning. And the first one, I had been in the company a month, and we had gone up to another NDP north of Saigon, about 7 miles, and it was called the Alamo, because that's just what it looked like. And we went out that morning on an S&D, which is search and destroy. It was about 9 o'clock. We left the highway. The Alamo was right there on the edge of the highway. We went down the highway for a little bit and then crossed over and went out into the jungle. About 9:15, 20, something like that, we got a call on the radio that Alpha Company was in heavy contact up north, and they were calling for help. And they were probably about a mile north of us. So we double time out on the road, and we're double timing up in that direction. And I could see, anybody could see, that there were gunships just plastering that jungle. There was something going on up there. There were explosions. You could hear them. You could see the gunships. And as we started getting close, our CO started taking us off the road and crossing diagonally across this rice paddy. And before we got there, he was telling me, my squad, and first squad, he wanted us to go across this canal that we found on the other side of this rice paddy, probably 20, 25 feet across, and there was a large wooden plank across it as serving as a bridge. They said, we can't get A Company. We cannot raise them on the radio. They could all be dead for all we know right now. But we've got to get somebody over there. See if you can find their right flank. See if we can, join their flank. Okay. I got my squad over. First squad comes over, and we had gone into what they call a skirmish line advance, where you're all on a line like this and you're going forward, sweeping. Billy, my point man, is probably as far away as you are from me, up in front of me, when all of a sudden the ground's being chopped up around his feet, and he collapses, and he falls into this ditch. And he's screaming bloody murder, and seriously, the thoughts into my head, oh God, he's dead. He's dead. And all the guys are on the ground. We had been ambushed. The rounds are coming in so fast that there was this black GI. I remember he was hitting the shoulder. He was on the ground. He was hitting the shoulder. The impact threw him over, and no sooner rolled over when he was hitting the other shoulder, and then thrown back over again. Martin, who was carrying the extra ammo for our M60 machine gun crew, jumped up out of this ditch, and I was sure he was taking ammo to the gun crew. But then he slipped and he fell back into the ditch. I would learn later he'd taken a round on the head. I had gone in there with a squad of 8 guys. 8 guys in the Vietnam War was really a full team. As a lot of guys. Normally you didn't have anything like that. But I would only have 4, maybe 5, certainly not more than that, were still alive at the end of the day after we got out of there. And when this fire was going on, I hear the platoon sergeant. So many things are going on at the same time. Ambush is chaotic. It is a chaotic bunch of noise, hollering, screaming, gunfire. You're trying to focus. My immediate focus was Billy, my point man, who I knew was seriously wounded at that point. I'm hearing Sergeant Green, the platoon sergeant. He's yelling, get on that radio. Stay on that radio. That radio is our life right now. And I'm calling up to Billy. I get up to him, and I'm propping his one foot under the wooden, because it's hanging at a grotesque angle. He took several rounds from an AK-47 that was from a spider hole that was only 8 feet away from this guy. Billy was one of the finest point men I'd ever seen. He could smell Charlie. He knew where the enemy was at. And on this day, he gets shot from somebody 8 feet away. That's when you know your stuff's really getting loose. And I put the foot under him. I said, now look, Billy, I'm going to have to get you back to the canal, get you through there on the other side. And I handed him my 45 because I had dropped everything to come up and get him. And I said, now, Billy, look, you're going to have to keep your head down. We don't have very much cover here. And if you see Charlie, use the 45 because I'm going to be busy getting you back there. And as we're going back, I had to be very careful. I told Billy to be careful. Don't raise your head. Because if you did one of these, and I did it once or twice, about this far off the top of your head, you could see pieces of grass being snipped from rounds. You could pieces of the dirt and gravel being tossed. And I said, you do not want to get up. And as long as I got him back far enough to the canal that there was a little bit of a drainage ditch area, I got him over there, got him up on the other side, threw his body up over the embankment because the rest of the company was on the other side of the embankment. And then I remember Sergeant Green was yelling, get back across the canal. Grab as many wounded as you can, but get back across that canal. And I'm still trying to remember bits and pieces, so much of that. That whole ambush lasted 5 minutes. And it seemed like it was a half an hour. And I remember when we got back on the other side, this lieutenant saying, look, we've got a wounded man over there. And he was assigning me to take some guys, go back over there and get him. I said, sir, my weapon is over there. And so he tosses me his weapon, and I'm grabbing these 2 or 3 guys, and I said, stay off that plank. They've got that plank, zeroed in now, so we're going to have to go up through the canal and up this defile right here. And so once we got over there, we saw the wounded man, and just by chance, I happened to look off to my left, and I saw another dead GI. And I said, well, that can't be one of ours, because my squad was on the left flank, a first squad, which would have put me over here. I can account for all of my guys, said that's got to be A Company. That's got to be whatever's left of Alpha Company. So we found them at least. And I jumped out in front of these guys and I started opening. I can't see the enemy. Nobody had even seen the gooks yet. We didn't know where they were. We just had a general idea of where the fire was coming from. And so I'm spraying out in front of me, and then it's all gone. And I'm saying, guys, that's it. I'm out of ammo. Get back on the other side. So we have the wounded guy. We get him over there. Okay, I'm trying to cut this down because we had been there all that day. Once we got on the other side, they started calling in artillery. Now, they were hitting with 105s, and they were hitting bunkers that were probably 30, 40, yards away. And I remember, you hear these sounds that in the movies, the artillery, that's exactly what it sounds like. And they were coming over, and the concussion was so loud you could almost not hear it at all. And I remember we were in a drainage ditch up to our waist in water, and you'd feel the ground go up and go back down because of the water and the concussions. It'd go up and go back down. They had hit the artillery for a while, then they brought in the gunships, and there was one Cobra in particular that was having it out with one particular bunker. He kept trying to knock it out, couldn't get any satisfaction. He would come up with his miniguns, and to watch a minigun hit is like watching a sewing machine chopping up that ground in that area. And still couldn't silence the bunker. He's really ticked by this point because he came back around and hovering right in place. He was slamming rocket after rocket into that bunker and finally, silenced the bunker. It's interesting the things that can go through your mind when you're in moments like that, when you figure, I'm going to die any second here, any second. You hear people talk about how their lives flash before them and that sort of thing. And I didn't have that happen. The thing I was most concerned about was I was thirsty, and I did not want to die thirsty. Honest to heaven, that was my mindset. And as I'm bringing Billy back, I'm getting my canteen out, and I'm trying not to lift my head very high, and I'm downing that. Now, the water over there could get very hot. It was just plastic canteens. And I drank that whole thing. And then when it was gone, it suddenly dawned on me, hey, you're still alive, and now you don't have any water. It's the insanity that will go through a person's mind when you're in a situation like that. You don't think straight. You think, and you're concentrating, but you can have some mighty dumb thoughts. Anyway, that night, we had finally decided they were going to pull out. We were going to get out onto the road and get back down to the main highway that was going to take us to the Alamo. Now, they had been popping parachute flares as soon as it got dark, constantly. Unless a person's actually been in an environment like this, they cannot know how spooky it is, because all of that thick foliage with those flares coming down, there are 1,000 movements, 1,000 individual movements out there. What's real? What isn't? What's Charlie? What's a leaf? And the CO had made sure that we had 2 columns and that we could at least reach out and maybe touch that other guy, because we did not want to make the mistake of firing on our own people. And once we got out to the highway, we went down to the main highway where there was an ARVN compound. That's just Army Republic of Vietnam. And we set up there that night to just wait, because we were going to have to sweep the battlefield the next day, to collect our dead, any other wounded. Okay, next day came around, and we made that sweep, and then we started going down the road. Now, we had a lot of guys that were wounded, but didn't feel they were wounded enough to be medevaced out, and they were not going to leave their buddies. They just wouldn't do it. So you have this hodgepodge group of, dirty, filthy, scroungy-looking, infantrymen. A lot of them with the bandages on their heads, on their arms, and that sort of thing. And as we're passing this ARVN compound, this one ARVN's talking gibberish to us. We can't understand. But we had a Chu Hoi with us, which was a former Viet Cong who had come to our side, and we're using him as an interpreter and a scout. So what's he talking about? And he said, well, basically, he's just saying that you're crazy to be going out there and getting yourselves killed and getting wounded when all you have to do is just sit back in the rear someplace and, leave well enough alone. And we could see they had laundry hanging on their lines, and some of these guys were swinging in hammocks. I need to tell you something. That is where it changed for me. That is where my entire mindset about that war changed. And I wasn't the only one. I think that day was significant because I talked to some other guys. I talked to our platoon sergeant, who pretty much summed it up for all of us. He said, listen, the politicians will tell you one reason that we're over here. Uncle Sam will give you another reason, why we're fighting over here. The South Vietnamese government will give you another reason why we're fighting over here. Well, I'm going to tell you something right now. The only thing that I'm fighting for from now on is to get your butts and Sergeant Green's butt home alive. And he was serious, dead serious. We all were. I didn't give a crap what happened to the Vietnamese people after that. The war had been really turning. That war had been turning. We were aware of the protests that were going on back home. We were aware of being called baby killers. We were aware of an awful lot of things. And nobody any longer wanted to die in a nameless rice paddy somewhere if nobody gave a crap. And we started taking it out on the Vietnamese people. We could be really brutal with the civilians. We had already seen our share of combat. We had already been in our firefights. We'd seen buddies get killed or maimed for life. We would go through villages where a guy could step on a mine that the villagers had been walking up and down all day. They knew where they were at, but they weren't telling us. And that did not, make them, special in our eyes either. So by the summer of '68, that war was really turning. I think most of us knew the South is not going to win this war. There is no bloody way that the South is going to beat the kind of indoctrination and determination that the North has got that causes them to come all the way down here, realizing they're probably never going to see home again, but they have a common goal, and that's the reunification of their country. The South doesn't have that. The South has got its corruption. The South is looking out for their own welfare, and you cannot fight and win a war like that, not against the North Vietnamese army. So I think most of us said, no, we're done. You had instances, and I know it happened, of mutinies where whole companies refused to go out. They would not go out if they knew that road was dangerous, or if they thought they had a CO that was gung-ho. I'm sure you've heard the instances of fragging. That was not exaggeration. I never saw this stuff. I never saw it happen. But I'm reasonably sure it did. And so from that moment on until I went home, I was anti-war. I was anti-war, I was anti-military, and the very beginnings of what would be my hippie mindset when I got home was starting then. You were seeing more GIs wearing their peace symbols, more GIs wearing their love beads around their necks. They would put the peace sign on the side of their helmet, or peace and love. They were not hiding the fact of where their minds now were about that war and about back home. And we knew that wouldn't make any difference at home, that we still would not get the support back home. But these were decisions that we were making for ourselves. And really, the war started going down. The war was going down from that point, and it would never recover. The only other incident I remember from my time over there that I want to share had to do with, I was there in my last month. And our company was part of an operation up near the Cambodian border where we were assigned to take possession of this hill because it was the intersection of several major trails that were coming down from the north and coming across the Cambodian border into South Vietnam. Now, we knew they were traveling well. Intelligence had told us that there was at least one NVA battalion in that area, maybe even a regiment. And they wanted our company, all by ourselves, Charlie Company, was to go and get up on top of that hill. We were supposed to be an anvil that several units from the 101st and I think the 4th Infantry Division were going to be sweeping the enemy south and then chopping them up on our anvil, provided we were able to keep them there long enough until the good guys got there. But we also knew there was no way that the NVA were just going to sit there for a day or two getting chopped up when their goal was to get to Saigon. They had orders already. So we had to hold them as long as we could. But with the understanding that after about the second or third day, they were going to fall back into the jungle and go on south some other way. Okay. But we had to stay there. When we got there, we got up on top of the hill, and then some of the historically minded said, you know, this looks like, you ever been to Gettysburg? You got the round top, you got Little Round Top, and about a football field's length away was a smaller hill. And we had decided, look, we're going to have the main company up here, but we want to get at least 2 machine gun crews down there and a couple of squads on that one, because there's enough gap here that Charlie's going to try to flank this hill. Now, we've got the jungle for our backs. He ain't going to come through there without making a bunch of racket. And he's not dumb enough to do that. He knows he's on limited time. And he's only got one other option, and that's the field out in front of this hill. The wood line on the other side is probably about a quarter mile away. We had gotten set up. We got the gun crews over on the other hill. We got dug in, and along about 3 in the morning, we started getting mortared. And they're walking the mortar rounds up to that hill, which is how you actually aim mortars anyway, until you're on target. And so we're calling for the flares. The flares are going off. We can actually see movement, and we know these aren't just shadows playing on leaves, because we've got the binoculars. We can see they're forming up in that wood line, and it's looking like a whole regiment to me. I mean, I don't know. I didn't know. I just knew there was a lot more over there than we had on that hill. And come daylight, or just before daylight actually hit, they hit us with their first ground attack. And they're running across that field, just lickety-split. The strangest thing about those guys is I don't care how you chopped them down, somebody is jumping over them to take their place and continuing on. That was the kind of indoctrination that was put into the North Vietnamese soldier's head from the time he was a child. And it's hard to fight against somebody like that. But we kept calling for flares, we kept firing, we kept, taking them down, and they kept right on coming. And I remember they were so close to the bottom of the hill, I have no real way of measuring. Let's say 25, 30 meters, something like that, to the bottom of the hill. They were coming up. You could actually hear them grunting and breathing heavily, panting to get up that hill. And we are firing as fast as we can, taking one guy, move over to that guy, take him down, take this guy over here. We're lobbing grenades down there, anything we can do to slow them up. And it's slowing them up, but it isn't stopping them. And as sure as shooting, they come up, they tried to flank the hill. And when that happened, we got on the radio and we said, all right, open up, because we've got them in a perfect crossfire right here. And so we closed that whole door right there. And in fact, when the guys came over from that other hill after the enemy had departed the area, they had to kind of like hopscotch and jump to get over the bodies, to get back over where we were. I remember Kendall. Kendall, to me, I think he epitomized what the American GI was at that time of the war. And he epitomized what an American was. He epitomized what the spirit of an American was, because he was on the M60 machine gun. The enemy was there at the base of the hill trying to get up. Kendall was the biggest peacenik in the company. I mean, nobody badmouthed the Army and belly-ached and complained like he did. You know, he hated the Army. You know, he had his love beads and everything else. But all of a sudden, Kendall stands up, and he puts one foot on the sandbags in front of the foxhole, and he's opening up with that 60. He's just chopping away, and he's yelling, "You want this hill? Come on up and get it." And he just continues to fire at these guys. And then Sergeant Green, he's yelling, "Kendall, get your blankety blank down before they shoot it off." And reality hits Kendall at that point, and he gets back down. But I thought about that for the longest time. I said, you know, that's America. That is so typical of the American GI. He will bellyache, he will complain, he'll do everything else in the world, but he will never show you his back. He will not leave that piece of ground until he's ordered to do so, or he's dead. And I felt so much pride. You know, I said there's so little to have pride in over here. But I certainly have pride in these guys. I have pride in my buddies. And I've heard it said time and time again about how America lost the war. And I tell them, I said, look, you understand, there were two wars over there. The politicians were fighting theirs. We were fighting ours. We won our war. It was you politicians that lost yours. We went out and we took every objective you told us to take. We never gave up any ground that we had won. We never left any hill till you told us to. We met the best the enemy had, and we beat him each and every time. So don't try to tell me we lost the war. You people lost yours. And I think most GIs, most Vietnam vets will tell you that. So that by the time I was ready to come home in July, I was an old man. We all were. We were all old men. I remember we got there, our average age was 20. I turned 21 March when I got there, about 3 weeks after I got in country. And I said, you know, it's not John Wayne. It's not Randolph Scott. When you can see what war does to people, when you can see the mutilation, when you can smell the stench of death, when you can go through a dead enemy body that's been out there for 6 months in the hot sun, and you have to search it for papers or maps, and then 10 minutes later sit down, you know, over here by him and open up a can of C rations and it doesn't bother you at all, then you have changed. You have changed. And it had made old men out of us. I certainly came back to the world different. All of us did. All of us did. In fact, one of the first things when I sat down at supper at my folks' table, after I think I'd been there a week, I said or did something that troubled my mother. And she said, "You're not the same person." And I looked at her and said, "I know, Mom, he died in the war." And I just couldn't say anything else to her. And I thought that pretty much summed the whole thing up. I could not speak about that war for 7 years after I got home. Nobody wanted to hear about it. Nobody wanted to be reminded of the war. And there was no greater reminder than a Vietnam veteran. We were ridiculed going through the airport in Oakland. There were a group of 6 or 7 of us in our khakis. These hippies came up and they're throwing these flower petals on us. And they said, "We're exorcising the demons of war from you." I wanted to lay them flat. And in fact, this one guy hauled off to smack him, and the police were there to stop it, But that was my introduction, to the feeling. I could not leave the airport in my khakis. One of the first things I did, I got to a store as close as I could find it, and I bought me some civilian clothes, some bell bottoms, my hippie shirt. I even bought me some little rectangular rose-colored sunglasses. They're priceless. They'd be worth money today. But I then packed all of my khakis into the bag, left it in the airport. I was putting that all behind me. I told myself, look, you've disoriented yourself completely from the military way of thinking. And I went out and I got on the road, and for the next 3 years, in fact, that's the epilogue, to my memoirs. Somebody asked me one time, was there racism over there? Well, it depended upon where you were at and who you were with, but yeah. There was voluntary segregation. The blacks stayed with their, group. The whites stayed with their group. But the only group of people that you never really saw that happening to were your line units, the infantry. Because you're out there in that bush with that black man, and he's out in that bush with you. And you would see somebody, he might have been carrying a few extra boxes of ammo for the machine gun, and nobody had to say anything. They would just walk over, take one of them off his shoulder, put it on his shoulder, carry it for a while, because you needed one another, number one, to survive out there. But you were also experiencing the same things. You missed your folks. You had the same heartaches and everything. You had the same fears. And we went back to the Like base camp one day. There were 3 of us whites. There was 2 black guys, and I think that there was a Latino, a Mexican or somebody with us. And one of the first things we did was head over to the EM Club. We're looking to get a beer or something like that. And we were in there 5 minutes. And you could just sense the racism in that place. Everybody was so segregated. And, we're kind of looking at one another. We went back outside and we agreed, look, we're going to go back out to the NDP. We ain't staying here. There is no bloody way we're going to stay here with that sort of crap going on. These people don't get it. They just don't get it. So I didn't really see anything. The race relations were good if you were in the field because you had a vested interest in one another, but not in base camp. I've been asked more than once, given that the United States was having all of these campus unrests and all of the anti-Vietnam War riots and everything else, did you have any problems with your own family? Now, at that time, parents were going against their children. Children were going against their parents. Homes were being broken up. And I don't think, if you weren't living in those days, you can't appreciate it. It was serious. It was serious because you had the parents who had grown up in the old school of America, right or wrong, love it or leave it type of thing, whereas your kids were being fed all of the liberalism from the rock bands, from the hippie movement and everything else. They wanted to be a part of what they thought was going to make a big difference. But you couldn't do that with your dad or grandpa who had been in the Second World War, who had gone through the Depression, that sort of thing. And so it affected me. It affected my family. It would eventually be the reason that I got on the road for 3 years. But it was tense when I got home because they didn't, I don't think they knew how to broach the subject. They were also aware of the campus demonstrations. They were also aware of what was being said about the GIs, the baby killers and that sort of thing. And I don't know if they were waiting to see what was going to come out of me, to see what I had to say about it. I mean, like I said, within a week or so, my mother would know, I wasn't the same son she knew. But it was especially hard with my dad, especially hard. Because around that time, they had the Kent State killings where the students had been killed by the National Guard. Very sensitive time. These weren't things that just were sloughed off the next day. An entire country was hurting, had been hurting for almost 10 years. And then when things like this were happening, when you were having the moratoriums in Washington, D.C., where everybody was marching, you either were a hard hat construction worker in New York loving the flag, or you were beating up the hippies across the street. The lines were clearly drawn at this point. I thought they were for me too, because I would go from having grown up a conservative to being a long-haired hippie liberal. And I made the mistake, I'll never forget it. We're watching the news. Dad's sitting in the front room with me. He's eating a sandwich. And the subject of Kent State came up. It was on the news. It was still being reported. And my dad said something to the effect, and I'm not going to use the language, but he said those long-hair SOBs had it coming. And I looked at him. I said, Dad, they were murdered. The National Guard murdered these students. He took that sandwich, he threw it clear across the room. I had never seen him that angry before. He said, I want you out of this house tomorrow. I want you out of this house. I don't want to see you again. I said, I don't have a problem with that. I'm ready to get out of this house and go elsewhere. And yeah, it upset my mom, but my mom was the type of mother, she was the housewife, she was loyal to her husband and she wasn't going to cross her husband. The wives are supposed to be there to put the meals on the table and take care of the kids. And as trite as that sounds, that's exactly how it was back then. And this was all before women's lib and everything else. Yeah, I got out of the house the next day and I was gone for the next 3 years. Now, I would occasionally check in with my mom. I mean, I'd come back to St. Joe. I'd drop in and see my brother and that sort of thing, but I always had to do it when my dad was not there. And I was just a traveling hippie all over this country. Back when hippiedom was really, it was flowers in your hair. They did have flowers in their hair in those days. But it also started, God was working on me. And I didn't see it right away. But I started noticing certain things. I'd always been interested. Yeah, I believe there's a God. I believe there's a God. All I have to do, is just turn over a new leaf. This social gospel is very real. That's what most people think they have to do. But it went on like this, and after 3 years, I was in Sioux City, Iowa. I was working at a mission up there, helping the guys up there with the bums and everything else. And they had all these Bibles, and I have to pick one up. And I opened it up. Now, I had seen Bibles before, but as I opened this up, this thing's got all these notes at the bottom. And I'm starting at Genesis. And I'm reading those notes. I said, wait a minute. I didn't know that's what that meant. I didn't know what that said. And until 3 o'clock in the morning, I'm going through what was the first Scofield Bible I'd ever seen. And I said, this is fascinating. And it was at that point, right there, that God says, all right, I have you. Now, I'm going to run you through the wilderness for a little while. I'm going to take you out to the desert, teach you a few things, but you're mine. And that finally came to pass 2 years later in Quincy, Illinois, when I met Kathy. She was a student nurse down there. When I met Kathy for the first time, she'll hate to admit this, but when I met Kathy, she was kind of a fringe, long-haired hippie. Now, she won't admit to that, but she will admit, tell you herself, yeah, she had a liberal trend there. Like I said, I had come into town. I was spending the night there in this guy's apartment because I was going to go to St. Joe the next day. And he was working that night. Along about maybe 7, 8 o'clock, there's a knock at the door. And I go over and I open it up. I see this cute little long, dark brown-haired, brown-eyed girl. She was beautiful. And she said, "Are you so-and-so? Because I got some papers that I have to give you that somebody was here early to give you, and apparently you weren't here, and they asked if I would do it, if I would check. So, well, yeah, you're looking for the guy that stays here. I'm just spending the night here, you know, but I can see that he gets them." And I told her, I said, you know, I'm going on to St. Joe tomorrow to see my folks. And so we're talking for a few minutes, and she was saying, "Oh, well, gee, it's too bad that you have to, you know." And I said, "Well, a lot of things can happen between now and then." Now, you have to understand, I was playing it for whatever I could get. Here's this good-looking girl, you know, hey, if I'm not just going to close the door in her face, you know, without making an effort here. So I said, you know, yeah, a lot of things happen between now and then. You know, we said a few more things. Then she said she had to go because she had a pizza cooking. So she leaves. Now, this is the height of arrogance and conceit. But I stood there and I said, she's going to be back. She's going to be back. Give her half hour, whatever, but she's coming back. And I'll be sure shooting. She came back. I don't know what was a half hour, an hour, or whatever, but she came back and invited me over for pizza. So I went over there. We had some pizza. We talked. We got to know one another. I found out that she was a student nurse there at Blessing Hospital, which was just like 2 blocks over. So I told her, yeah, you know, if ever I'm back here in Quincy, sure, you know, I can come by and look you up, because I had no plans of coming back. I was going to St. Joe and I didn't know where that would lead to. But I left, and I simply could not get her off my mind for the next 2 days. She was all I thought about. Now, I had girlfriends before. They were come and go. I mean, you know, that's just, you know, the way guys thought back then. Probably still do, but I just was not getting tied down to any particular one. But I could not get her off my mind. And I'd never felt that way before. I mean, I'm realizing now God didn't plan for me to get her off my mind, because she was the catalyst. She was going to be the door that was going to lead me to that church, to the meeting where I was going to receive my Savior. I didn't know any of this, obviously. So for about 2 days, I'm over in St. Joe, and I just said, I can't do this. I've got to go back. And I went back, knocked on the door, and she opened the door, and we gave each other a big hug. And I think the expression is, you know, the rest is history. I had hitchhiked into Quincy, Illinois from Indianapolis. And I had gotten in there probably about 1 o'clock in the morning. I knew a guy in this apartment building. He said if I was ever in there, you know, I could use his apartment to spend the night in. Kathy and I had gone to these Paul Dixon meetings at the church there in Quincy. I probably, well, I don't know, but I think that God used Kathy initially to bring me to that point where I realized I needed to be saved, because I had known Kathy for maybe a couple of weeks. But that particular night that I was visiting Kathy in her apartment, she had visitation from the church, Calvary Baptist Church there in Quincy. There were 2 of the older gentlemen who were out making Tuesday night calls. And I was there, and they came in, they introduced themselves, and for about a month or maybe 6 weeks prior to this, I had been in Kansas City at a commune. It's what they call a Jesus commune. And I had been learning everything, you know, that I thought there was need to know about Christ. I figure I can hold my own with anybody. Of course, it was ecumenical, but I didn't even know what ecumenical was, but they sit down, we're talking. And he asked if I was familiar with Christ, with the gospel of Christ. Sure. He died for the sins of the world. Well, I'm part of the world. He died for my sins, so I'm in like flint. But one of them looked at me and said, but have you dealt with your own personal sins? Have you accepted Christ as your personal Savior and asked Him to forgive your sins? I said, whoa, what's that all about? I've never heard anything like this before. And we talked a little bit, and I said, I don't know. I got to think about this. I got to think. This is also new to me. I don't know what any of that is. And Paul Dixon was having a week of meetings down there. And so they said, no, Kathy's going to go. Well, I got to go. I'm going to go with you. I'd rather not. My old nature's still alive and kicking. But I went, and each night he made the invitation to come forward. With all eyes closed, with your heads bowed, come forward. There will be people here to talk to you about, your need for Christ, give you the plan of salvation, the gospel, everything. I didn't go that night. Second night, I didn't go. Third night, I didn't go. But I knew there were 2 nights left. The fourth night, I'm kind of like doing one of these. Man, I know I've got to go forward. I know there's something here, and I know God wants me to do the right thing, and I want to do the right thing by God. But because as soon as I start going out there, somebody's going to look at me, and I'm going to sit right back down. So I didn't go that night. Friday night's the last night. And I'm telling you, I finally got to a point, I said, God, listen, you're going to have to show me how to do this. I don't understand any of this, God. I wasn't calling Him Lord then. But I said, God, I do know and I feel in my heart, you want me to go down there. You want me to get something cleared up here in my life, and I don't understand any of it. If I go down there, you're going to have to put me down there. So they said, well, all eyes closed and your heads bowed, and we're standing, and I've got my hands on the pew, and I'm kind of like doing one of these. I'm making my way out of the aisle. I don't dare make eye contact with anybody because I knew I'd sit right back down. As soon as I got out there, I go walking down that aisle, and that night, I heard the gospel for the first time in my life. I didn't understand it all. That was to come. I was just a babe in Christ. I would have to get rid of a lot of the old friends, a lot of the old habits, and that was not going to be overnight. But that night, I accepted Christ into my heart as my Savior, and it was probably 3 or 4 days later when I'm by myself and I'm saying, God, I don't feel saved. I do not feel saved, and I want to be. If there was something I didn't say, if there was something I did wrong, please, I want you to come into my heart right now. I want you to come into my heart, take me, save me. And I'll tell you something, that was in 70, I think that was in the spring of 76. And from that day to now, I have never had a doubt in my heart, in my mind, that He saved me that night. Because I look at all of the steps along the way He's taken me. And I look back down that road, and every place He's been has been like a signpost. I can see it all. He did this, He did that, He did this, He did that. I remember when He was over here working on that, He did this to me over here. The thing that really bugs me is that I can't look up the road and have the same kind of faith. Why not? He's already shown what He can do. But the point was, God was working with me all along the way. He was teaching me things. He was saying, well, you can't do this, you can't do that. You've got to change your friends. You've got to change your lifestyle. You can't be doing this. And I would come under conviction, and get rid of that. It was not that difficult to get rid of a lot of that, because I truly believe that if you belong to God, He's going to give you that grace and that ability to, as Paul said, to forget those things which are behind and press towards the mark. It's incredible. He was going to direct everything, the courses of the age, everything to that 1 second. And so, yeah, and like I said earlier, we wound up going to church. We went to the Crusades, and I eventually, came forward and received Christ. But my goodness, yeah, we were dating, probably dated almost a good year, when we settled down and realized, hey, we got to do something here. We got to do something. And marriage was the direction that we really felt God was leading us in on that. And that was 47 years ago. 47 years and 3 children, and let's see, 6, 7 grandchildren. I should know. I should know how many grandkids I've got. But yeah, and God has been so good, because we've watched it all the way to today, and everywhere He's led, and the blessings He's poured out on us as a couple. He has taken care of everything. The problems and faults has lied with me and my lack of faith, when He's always been faithful. This was long before my dad and I had our reconciliation, because it was after I met Kathy, and we were going to hitchhike to this pop festival. Well, that didn't pan out, and I said, well, look, let's hitchhike over to St. Joe, see my folks. So we hitchhiked over there. Only time she'd ever hitchhiked in her life. But she was willing to do it for me. It was the last time she hitchhiked in her life. But when I went over there with her to my folks, my dad, he just seemed like he was mellowing out. There was a time it was worth your life to walk into that house if you had long hair. He was so much like Archie Bunker, it was ridiculous. He had his own chair in front of that TV. You did not sit in that chair. He had his black shoes, white socks. He was just Archie Bunker. When Kathy and I started going together, and particularly when we got close to getting married, and especially when she was pregnant with her first grandchild, he mellowed out so much. He met me in the front room one time, and he looked at me and said, son, I love you. Yeah, I said, yeah, Dad, I know that. Although that was only the second time in his life he ever told me that he loved me. And the only other time he was drunk. But I heard him say it of his own free will. He was a hard man to say he was sorry. But after that, he had long hairs in that house all the time. They could come and go. My brother's hair was longer than mine. Mine was long enough to put in a ponytail. But he had really mellowed out a lot. And it was at that point where, we were sitting on the front porch. We would talk about the war. We'd compare notes. Because I think for the first time in that man's life, he really started to wonder if he was really getting the truth from Washington. He was really starting to wonder, are we being fed a bill of goods here? Where's the America that I love? He was not willing to take it just, because they said so. And he was really turning his life around, but he got to a point where he was dying, and he would be gone. I think he might have been gone before before our first child was born. So he never had a chance to see his grandchild. But I was happy to know that he and I had reconciled ourselves before that happened. Here was a man who was a hard Irishman. The Hogans went all the way back to County Cork. And he, like all Irishmen, he loved his liquor. But it finally killed him in the end. He had gotten to a point where he realized, hey, maybe America is wrong in some areas. Maybe America is wrong, but I'm not going to tell you you have to leave it. And that made me feel good. That really, I think it made everybody in the family feel good. That was all so many years ago. He's gone. My mother's gone. It's just me, and my brother and sister. So, yeah, their reaction, like I said, it was kind of tense, but it was no different the reaction of any other family unit in the country at that time, and particularly family units that had a son or a father or a brother in that war when they came home. I remember when I made sergeant, I had probably been in the Army about 2 years at that point, and I think that was about the normal rate, the progression of growing in rank. I mean, you went from in basic, you were a private E3. That's about the lowest rank that you could have. But once you graduated, you were up to a private first class. And I was probably in Germany a year when I made specialist, 4th grade, which was equivalent to a corporal, but corporal's non-commissioned. Spec 4 was not. After I made private first class, I had already been in Germany for not quite a year yet, and you kept your nose clean. You passed all of your proficiency tests and everything because you were evaluated. And if you kept your nose clean, you would just gradually rise through the ranks. There was no reason not to. So by the time I was just finishing my 2nd year there, 1 month almost to the day, when I got my orders for Vietnam, I was promoted to Sergeant E5. I always thought the Sergeant E5, the 3 stripers, was the best rank to have. You didn't get enough responsibility to give you a headache, but you no longer had to do that other stuff. No more KP duty. I assigned people to do that. So I always thought that Sergeant E5 was perfect. It was the rank that I had. When I got to Vietnam, it was the perfect rank when they were looking for squad leaders, because I did end up an infantry squad leader. Some of the guys, I made friends over there. It was impossible not to, because of the nature of the work you're in. I don't know what other branches of the service can say this, but for a combat infantryman who is among other combat infantrymen, there really is a band of brothers. There really is, because you've known the same fears, you've smelled the same smells, you've had to do the same things, you've had to kill, and nothing draws men together closer than that. So yeah, I had friends, but you've got to also remember, you were reluctant to make new friends. You were reluctant to get to know the new guys because you had already lost buddies, and you knew what that felt like, and it wasn't something pleasant. So while we all had friends, I think we were very, very careful not to make a lot of them. We had 1 or 2 buddies. Even though you would have given your life for anybody in that platoon or company, you would have given your life for them. But at the same time, you didn't want to get that attached, because it would tear you up. I mean, I lost friends over there. All of us did. But I usually tried to limit it to 1 or 2. Billy, my point man, he was one of my really, really good friends. Oddly enough, the fellow who was on the LRP team that I told you about, that shot that wounded Viet Cong, he once told me, when I was going up to the line company, I was leaving the LRPs after several months there, he said, I really hated you when you come in here. I just couldn't stand you, but I want you to know something. You are one of my best friends, and you're leaving here as my friend. And that wasn't, unusual. That was not unusual. You got to know guys like that because you shared so much together. Nobody else would understand that except for him, except your buddies. And like I said, yes, I lost some friends over there. Did I meet any of them coming back? As far as I know, there was only one fella, R.A. Miller, Richard A. Miller. In fact, oddly enough, R.A. and I we were in the same troop in Germany together. And I had gone to Vietnam before him, and he came along afterwards. But I had a girlfriend at home. She had a girlfriend. She was wanting to know if there's some, guys that they could write, GIs, they could write pen pals. So I thought of R.A. Miller. I said, well, here, I'll tell you what. Write this guy. And Nancy was her name. There was another Kathy I was going with, not the current one, but Nancy was her girlfriend. And I said, Nancy, look, here, write to R.A. He'd probably like to correspond with you. Okay. I go back to Germany. Now, I don't see Nancy again. In fact, I never even saw Kathy again. But when I got back home, the first month after I was home, somehow or another, I got in touch with R.A., and I think he contacted me because he not only corresponded with Nancy, he come home when they got married, and he always said, I'll get you for this. I'll get you for this. But I never saw R.A. again after that. This would have been in probably 72, maybe 72, certainly not past 73. But I have never met anybody else. I have come close. I've met other guys that were in the sister regiments within our division, but never anybody that was in my regiment, and never anybody in my battalion. And I've been down to Branson many, many times when they've had the veterans get-togethers down there. And the only time I ever saw more than 5 or 6 guys who were from the 1st Infantry Division was in 205 when they were having that huge welcome home celebration. And after that, the numbers just kept dwindling. No, I haven't made any attempts to try to find them because I'll be totally honest with you. I don't make the attempts for the same reasons they don't. They got families. They've got lives that they're living. It's not that they don't want to try to remember, but it's just life goes on. Life goes on. I have a very, very dear friend in Kansas City, Jim Gartner. He was in Vietnam. He was with the 1st Air Cavalry Division. He'd did 2 tours over there. I was smart enough to learn the first time. But he and I are the best of friends. In fact, he and his wife are Christians. They go to, they're saved. I've heard their testimony, and I believe that they are saved. And so you have the Vietnam vets that you have met and made friends with since then. And the beautiful thing about it is, you don't have to really get to know them. If I meet this guy for the first time in my life, and he said, yeah, I was in 9th Division. Were you ever up at Song Bay? I said, oh, gracious, was I at Song Bay. I remember that red clay, remember that dirt. And he said, yeah, you remember the runway that went up over the hill like that? I've never met this guy before. And we are as close as 2 brothers. And all Vietnam vets are like that. You are brothers by virtue of being in a war that was not popular, that they didn't want to recognize you for, and that will push men closer together. And particularly the infantry, for the reasons I've already given. The infantry was really elite. I think probably, somebody once said, out of 500,000 servicemen over there, what did they say? Less than 6% were infantry, were on the line fighting. Somebody even brought up the point that we saw more combat in Vietnam as infantry than they ever infantrymen saw in World War II. And I couldn't understand that until they pointed out, they said, well, listen, Vietnam was a mobile war. You had choppers that were taking you everywhere, every day. If there was a conflict, if there's something going on up here, they choppered you out there. So you literally could be fighting every day, as opposed to Europe, where you're walking into Germany and it might be weeks before we have any kind of contact. You know, and somebody also said that probably a good third of the Vietnam veterans are gone now. A good third of us. You know, and it makes you realize your mortality, makes you realize that you're getting old. But I have so much pride in the guys that I was with, that I served with. Every soldier will tell you that, whatever war you're in will tell you that. And interestingly enough, my dad would never talk about the war. Never. I never heard him talk about the war the whole time that I was with him growing up. But my mother made a comment to me one time. She was talking about they would watch the news at night while I was over there. And they would see these battles and they would hear what's going on. And my dad said, that boy must be going through hell. And that man knew what it was. That man had known the hell of Guadalcanal. That man had known the hell of the Pacific Island fighting. And when I come home, we would sit out on that front porch for the longest time, compare notes. You know, tell about how we felt about this, that, or the other, the fears we had, the loneliness we had, because he couldn't say a thing, and I couldn't say a thing that either one of us couldn't identify with. And it was easy for him to talk. And I think that was probably the first time in years he'd ever really talked about the war. But we found out that we had an awful lot of things in common. All infantrymen do. I've always said that Vietnam was probably America's last truly conventional war. It was a war you could compare to Korea, World War II, but not after that. Everything was so modernized. Everything was so technical today. The most technical thing we had in Vietnam was what they call a starlight scope. Now all of your helmets in Afghanistan over there have them mounted on their helmets. They just flip them down. We had one, and we had to share that with other companies. It was really just you, your weapon, the enemy and his, and you went at it, and one of you came out. And that's why I say it was America's really last conventional war. And we kind of feel special about that, because after we're gone, that's it. That's absolutely it. And I'm not going to belittle, you know, our brothers in Afghanistan or anywhere else, because I had talked to Brandon a number of times about that way. We broached that subject a number of times. And I knew Brandon was my brother. He knew I was his brother because we had shared things in common that nobody else ever had. And so I know that the veterans that come from over there, they're our brothers, but we can be awfully, awfully selfish. We see guys that might have been in the Air Force, might have been in the Navy. Yeah, we was in the Gulf. I was in the Navy, in the Air Force, and, you know, I say, okay, anyway, what were we talking about? But it's not belittling their service to their country. Not at all. I thank God that they're there. But I think I'd like to finish with this. It's a quote from George Patton. He said, talking about the dead, in the American servicemen who died in the war, he said, "It's wrong to mourn their deaths. Rather, we should thank God that men like this lived." You know, and I thought about it for a while. I said, yeah, he's right. He's right. There were men who were alive, who were willing to do what they had to do, you know, for the families back home. So don't mourn them. You know, thank God that they were alive, that they were here. Do I think that America could have that same kind of determination that we had 50 years ago of fighting in an unpopular war and fight it regardless? Because we had a sense of honor, a sense of morality for the folks back home, a sense of honor and pride for that flag that seems to be disappearing today. I don't know. I really do not know. I mean, we're seeing them fight Afghanistan. We're seeing, that sort of thing going on, but I don't know. Something's missing. Something's missing, and I don't know if America will ever get it back again. I know we won't until we get right with God. It will never come back till we get right with God. But America has a lot to be proud of, because there's that one thing about America that's never going to change. You are always going to have that slice of America that will still stand up, that will still face an enemy, foreign or domestic, that will still salute that flag, that will still love America as it was founded. And in the end, that's all you need, is just a handful. And America will survive. I looked back and I said, well, it wasn't long ago I was in Vietnam. It was not that long ago. In 76, actually I met Kathy in 75, and I think the Crusades were in 75, which would have meant I came home in July of 69, 3 years on the road. It had not been that long since I'd been in Vietnam. And I remember what I was when I went and what I was then. That was 50 years ago. 50 years ago, my friend, that I was in Vietnam, and there was so much more that I could tell you, but it's just not possible. The things that you see today in the world of liberalism, in the world of society and politics, and all of these things we have going on right now that are just making you sick to your stomach, started 50 years ago. I was there when it started. You could see what that liberalism in our education system, in our government, in our society and social system has done for 50 years. So don't be surprised that you have this, because for 50 years we forgot all about God. Lord, we'll take it from here. Well, I hope you're happy with what you've got, because you did it without God. And my hope for the future, hope for my children, my grandchildren, is that as Christians, as His people, we will humble ourselves before Him, and we will seek His face, and we will confess our evil ways and forsake them, because He said He would heal our land. I believe Him. I believe Him. But we, as His people, have got to take that step. I've appreciated talking to you. I would be more than happy to talk to you at any other time, one-on-one. I don't have a problem talking about Vietnam, because most of the young people today don't have any idea. I've made several talks and given several classroom discussions as high schools to students who weren't even born then. And they've always had that look of interest in their eye, like they're hearing something for the very first time in their lives. And I think I speak for a lot of Vietnam vets, because I've talked to many of them who have done the same thing. We want these young people to know. We will never turn you away. We will never not answer your questions. Don't be afraid to come up and ask us. We want you to know, because our numbers are thinning out. And one of these days, we aren't going to be here. And I want to know that you have the truth, that you know what was going on, and you don't have to get it from a liberalized, rewritten history in your school books. I love you guys. I love you all. I look forward to really sitting down with you sometime. Until then, give your heart to God. Give your heart to Jesus Christ. You'll never regret it. Thank you.